Hugh, did you want to jump in?
No, I'm good for now.
You're just making notes?
Yeah, just making notes.
All right, so I want to get to the next question, and I wanted to ask all of you the next question. So, should state government help subsidize the development and or use of renewable energy? Another big, broad question. Yes, no, unsure, or no opinion? All right, so is that 87%, Steve? 87% yes, 6% no, 6% unsure or no opinion, is that right? Okay. All right, who wants to take that one? Yes, no, unsure or no opinion?
Yes. So, I mean, why not? We subsidize fossil fuels in lots of different ways. Not only directly subsidizing, the costs of the companies that mine and produce the fossil fuels, but we subsidize them in other ways too. On the bar there, because I thought that was the best place for people to see them, are some costs of coal report that my organization commissioned earlier this year that showed that there's just a tremendous amount of healthcare costs and damages. I think it's, I don't have it in front of me, it's in here somewhere, $1.5 billion a year Michiganders pay in healthcare costs and damages related to particulate matter, small particulate matter from the state's 9 oldest coal plants. That's the equivalent of $500 a family for healthcare costs and damages. Lots of premature deaths. None of those costs are reflected in our rates, and if we're going to actually pay the true cost, we're going to have to subsidizing coal and other fossil fuels, and try our best to incorporate those healthcare damages and environmental damages into the cost of the product. Otherwise, it's not a level playing field. So if we're going to talk about, and I talk a lot to folks, conservative folks who don't like the subsidies, and I talk a lot to people like the Detroit News editorial page that screams bloody murder every time somebody wants to subsidize a wind project in some way, but you never hear a peep from them for subsidies for other things, nuclear and oil. So yeah, if we're going to subsidize the other fuels, we should subsidize the clean fuels also.
Okay, Harold?
Yeah, I would, again, take issue with my neighbor to the left. I don't think that we should be subsidizing them at all. So I agree that we are subsidizing them, but I say, if you want, let's levelize the playing field. Let's not subsidize nuclear, coal, and natural gas and see how the prices for PV and wind play out.
Paul?
I got to say I agree with you. I would like that option too. I think that clean energy wins on a completely level playing field. As a political reality, we've not been able to do that. We've got subsidies embedded in the fossil fuels, forevermore. And, as a political reality, it's easier to try to get subsidies for green energy than try to eliminate the subsidies for everything.
Well, I'd just like to note the numbers I was giving earlier are numbers that I've calculated, and that report you can find online, so you can see the assumptions that I had to make, because you have to make assumptions about how long wind's going to be, how long the turbine's going to last and things like that. But having said that, I made the assumption of no subsidies for the solar and the wind, and I couldn't take out the subsidies that are there for coal and oil. And I'm finding that they're basically competitive, even though they wouldn't have a subsidy. So, on a level playing field right now, I would think that wind and probably in the next 5 to 10 years, solar will be competitive.
I would have to add that when we're talking about subsidies, there are two kinds of subsidies. There are direct subsidies and indirect subsidies. And what Paul is mostly talking about, if I'm understanding correctly, are the direct subsidies that are available, to the coal and natural gas industry. The indirect subsidies, deal with the effect on ecosystem services and climate maintenance, and those are not included either.
No.
So we need, if we include both of those,
Oh, yeah.
where the cost of solar and wind today are far superior. And that's what I'm trying to get at, is thinking about your kids and your grandkids and where we're making our investments in our energy infrastructure now.
So, we're hearing from Governor Snyder and many Republicans in the legislature. They don't want to be picking winners and losers. We've heard that quite a bit. And there was an op-ed by Russ Harding from the Mackinac Center in Sunday's Free Press about how there should not be subsidies on renewable energy and that the market should decide. So what do you think about, I guess there's two separate arguments there.
The answer is if nothing is subsidized, not subsidizing one thing is smart. If something's subsidized, then you have to decide, are we making the wrong decision on the first subsidy, and then we need another subsidy to correct the first subsidy, and it gets into a big circle. Americans like cheap energy, and so you're not going to get rid of the subsidies on the traditional fuels. Given that that's the case, we probably have no choice but to try and level that playing field.
I don't have anything to add to that. I mean, that's a good answer, and I think he's dead on.
Harold, nothing? All right.
Wow.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about green jobs. First, how do we define them at all? It's become such a political term. Anybody?
Green jobs are anything the environmentalists say they are. I'm just kidding. It's a joke. It's a joke. No, I don't know how to define them precisely, and I don't know how to break that down. I mean, there's one place where you can get, you can look different places and find all kinds of different numbers depending on the methodology and the definition of the jobs, and then it gets further complicated when you talk about, what businesses are involved in, say, the solar supply chain, and what percentage of their business is involved in solar, and how many FTEs does that equate to? And so I don't have a good answer for what my definition of green jobs is. But clearly when we're talking about wind, when we're talking about solar, when we're talking about energy efficiency, when we're talking about your neighborhood, insulation company, your window installers that, if they're installing crappy windows, maybe that's not a green job. If they're installing high efficiency windows, that is a green job. So I don't really know where to go with that, and that's a non-answer, and that'll have to do.
I'll take a crack at it. I think you spoke, really eloquently early on about renewable energy. We know intuitively, what's renewable energy from his earlier definition about, something that's going to be available to us and it's not going to cost us money over time. I would say, there is a similar intuitive analogy with respect to green jobs. So a job that clearly leads to quality of life improvements for everyone would be a green job. If you're talking about coal and you're talking about mountaintop removal, in Appalachia, clearly there are losers associated with that process. If we're talking about natural gas and we're talking about the whole host, of environmental and social issues associated with fracking, natural gas is, clean. It's almost twice as clean, per kilowatt hour generated. But clearly, we know that quality of life improvements for all are not yielded by generating electricity from natural gas. It's fracked. So that would be just a crude, intuitive definition.
All right, Paul?
Well, I like that definition. I have not seen a good definition of green jobs that's countable. And I'm an economist, I want to count things. And when I look at how people have gone about trying to create green jobs and look at counting them, they're throwing in a lot of things I don't think are very green. And they're not including other things that I think are very green. And as a result, I don't think the number is very genuine, and I don't think the number is what we should really be looking at. we should be looking at this, is society better off as a result of doing this?
So do we have good numbers on the wind and solar industries in the state right now? In terms of, if we're looking at production of the technology?
No, actually, because we actually have, wind is actually built into a lot of industries where parts of that industry are doing one thing, like making boats, and the other part of the industry is making something else like a turbine blade. So we can start to get there, and we can certainly start to get a feel for what it is. But none of these industries that we have right now in Michigan, outside of a few of the solar plants, would exist without the other part of their business running. And so it's a very hard number to count.
Okay. You guys have anything to add to that?
I don't. I mean, the number I brought with me was from a recent study by the Environmental Law and Policy Center, and they said there are more than 240 companies in the wind and solar supply chain in Michigan employing more than 10,000 people, and that report goes on to talk about how it was a much, it was one of the sectors of Michigan's economy that was growing when everything else was contracting. And I think that's probably true. I don't know their methodology. I don't know how they got the 240 in the 10,000. But as far as I know, that's the most sort of detailed and exhaustive look at what Michigan industries are, are employing folks in solar and wind. And I think I have copies of that report up on the bar. And there's a map in that report, or not, well, there are maps, but there's also a listing of all the companies, and it's pretty impressive. I mean, you go down and you can, if you live in a big town, you can find it. There's somebody, some tool and die shop, some manufacturing facility that's making components or parts of components for wind and solar products, and they're all over the state. So, I can't vouch for the numbers, but that's to my knowledge the best study that's been done on that recently.
I think, again, it goes back to our conversation earlier about conservation and efficiency. And when you're talking about renewables or a society run on renewables, you can't decouple it from conservation and efficiency, because your goal is to drastically reduce your demand-side energy requirements. Then renewables become that much more better because you spend less money on your power plant. And when you do that, you can't decouple the conversation that you're asking us to engage in from a conversation about smart grid technology, from a conversation about, again, transportation and battery technology, control system technology.
Right. So I want to talk for a minute about the renewable energy portfolio standard that we have in the state and what role you see that playing in driving us forward. I'm looking at you, Paul.
Great.
If you want to start.
Well, the renewable portfolio standard did several things that were very important. It created a ready need for renewable energy within the region. It created a reason to build it, which allowed firms to do some of the startup things that they need to do. There's a lot of front-end costs to switching over to building wind turbine components, or instead of automotive or whatever. And you need to know that there's going to be a market there for it. This created a market and allowed us to start producing these types of things. The sad thing was we were late to the game. That game was already done, and it was done in Iowa and Texas, and we're way late to that game. But that's, I'm now saying I don't see a lot of, it had that power for us. And that's really important because it really, really, really starts driving people to producing something or thinking about changing their business. And that is the power of it. Not so much that we're going to be buying our electricity from these things. It's that people are thinking about how can we produce that electricity and how can we get it to the consumer the cheapest.